Walter White didn't survive that explosion because he's a genius. He survived because the writers cheated. Of all the implausibilities in Breaking Bad, none detonates quite as loudly as Walter White's infamous bag of crystals gambit with Tuco Salamanca.
Fulminated mercury.
In that scene, Walt hurls a chunk of mercury fulminate onto the floor, triggering an explosion so fierce it shatters windows and rocks the building, yet leaves Walt, Tuco, and a full bag of the same explosive sitting comfortably unharmed.
A little tweak of chemistry.
Let's be clear, mercury fulminate is real, unstable, and dangerous. But the dramatic shockwave Vince Gilligan serves up would not only have blown out windows, it would have blown Walt and Tuco into next week. Mythbusters even tested it. The verdict? The amount Walt used would not have caused such a blast, and the amount required for that kind of explosion would have left nothing of Walt but a bloodstain. In other words, TV magic. Yes, the writers tried to slip in a fig leaf of plausibility. Walt explains it was fulminated mercury with a little tweak of chemistry. That tiny phrase is a masterstroke of narrative sleight of hand, the kind of line written precisely to keep nitpickers at bay. A tweak of chemistry here, a suspension of disbelief there, and voila! Your high school teacher turned criminal mastermind survives the sort of detonation that should have concussed everyone in the room. It's not science, it's script writing.
All right. I'll give you your money.
And yet, this choice has ripple effects. Wouldn't the shockwave have set off the rest of the bag? Shouldn't Tuco, high-strung and impulsive, have tried to snort one of the glittering crystals before Walt could stop him? Why would a seasoned cartel thug hand over money to the man who just humiliated him in his own headquarters, now half destroyed, henchmen wounded, police likely en route, without immediate retaliation? The answer is simple. Because that's what the script demanded. Plot armor, cash included.
It is the study of what?
The irony, of course, is that Breaking Bad usually prided itself on its logistical rigor. This wasn't a fantasy show where characters shrugged off physics with a wink. It sold itself on chemistry, engineering, and cause and effect. So when the series leans on superhero TV logic as heavily as it does in this moment, it jars. For a show this carefully constructed, it's hard not to notice when the science collapses under the weight of spectacle. One could argue, charitably, that Walt's precision saved him. Nobel-level chemistry knowledge, impeccable aim, a calculated distance from Tuco. Plus, why not, a dash of geometry. Or perhaps he simply had the benefit of what the internet has dubbed plot armor.
You got one part of that wrong.
More cynical viewers might note that in-universe, Walt could just as easily have been bluffing with harmless crystals. But none of these explanations holds up against the sheer absurdity of the spectacle. Ultimately, the fulminated mercury explosion remains the show's most glaring case of artistic license. It's exhilarating television.
Heisenberg says, relax.
A moment that cemented Walt as a figure to be feared. But also a moment that should have sent everyone in that room straight to the ER. Or the morgue. The brilliance of Breaking Bad is that the series was so compelling, so meticulously crafted elsewhere, that this early leap into pulp doesn't derail it. It could have been a shark jump. Instead, it became one of the show's defining images. But make no mistake, Walter White didn't survive that blast because of chemistry. He survived because the script told him to. The real miracle wasn't scientific genius. It was narrative necessity. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Gus never respected Walt. He respected the meth.
This whole friend of law enforcement thing?
The great irony of Walter White's rise is that his most dangerous enemy once appeared to be his greatest ally.
Meal. Agent Schrader and I got a chance to catch up at one of my restaurants a few days ago.
Gustavo Fring, the consummate businessman who buried his humanity under routines, recipes, and razor-sharp order, was never known for sentiment. He lived a double life without friends, without warmth, only power. And yet, for a fleeting stretch of Breaking Bad, it almost seemed as if he liked Walter. Calling it affection is generous, but there was something resembling respect. Walt was, after all, the most intelligent cook Gus had ever encountered, a man who could elevate meth to a kind of crystalline art form. Gus knew he was naive in the ways of crime, a liability in temperament, but still worth protecting.
I have invited you into my home. Prepare food.
He shielded Walt from cartel interference, humored him when Jesse became a problem, and even hosted him at his dinner table. These gestures weren't standard operating procedure for Gus. They were calculated exceptions, but admiration has its limits. Walt was never content to know his place. He defied hierarchy, intervened against Gus's explicit orders, and chose Jesse over the carefully balanced empire Gus had built.
Paid for your rehab, ran over those 2 drug dealers.
The moment Walt killed Gus's dealers in a public, impulsive act of revenge, the partnership was doomed. Walt fancied himself above Gus. Gus saw only another liability. Speculation abounds about whether things might have gone differently.
Climate and escape?
We are going to process them into ricin.
If Jesse had poisoned the dealers quietly with ricin, would Gus have looked the other way? Hardly. Gus ran his empire with surgical precision. 2 street-level dealers mysteriously dropping dead just as Walt and Jesse entered the fold would have rung alarm bells. If the cartel didn't notice, Gus certainly would have. And Walt's unrelenting hubris ensured the truth would surface sooner or later. Others argue that Gus's trust in Walt was genuine, that he allowed Gale to be dismissed, tolerated Jesse's volatility, and extended dinner invitations because he valued Walt beyond the product. Yet Gus himself debunks that fantasy. His flashback confession in Box Cutter is clear. He never considered Walt a professional. He respected the chemistry, not the man. Walt was a temporary necessity, a skilled technician with an expiration date.
I understand. I have a very large investment into this. There's so much overhead that I can't afford.
Once Gale was properly trained, Walt was expendable. The mythology that Gus liked Walt collapses under scrutiny. Gus did what Gus always did: manipulate. He allowed Walt to feel indispensable, to bask in the illusion of respect, because it kept him cooking. And Walt, drunk on his own ego, mistook strategy for sincerity. In truth, Gus and Walt mirrored each other. Both were meticulous, both sought control, and both underestimated the chaos within their protégés. Gus thought Walt's family man persona would make him manageable.
Mr. White, he's the devil.
Instead, Walt proved more reckless than any junkie, more ambitious than any cartel thug.
Let Mr. White go. Pay him off or fire him. Don't kill him.
Walt, for his part, thought Gus was a partner. He was merely a handler. The tragedy and brilliance of their conflict lies in this misunderstanding. Walt believed he was rising above Gus. Gus believed he could contain Walt. Both were wrong. Respect, admiration, even liking had nothing to do with it.
We're safe.
What bound them together was need, and what destroyed them was ego. Gus Fring's infamous 1-hour deadline wasn't genius strategy. It was actually one of his biggest mistakes. When Gus Fring first entertained the idea of doing business with Walter White, he did not extend a warm handshake or a flexible deadline.
Absolutely, but I just need a little more time.
1 hour. If you miss it, don't ever show your face in here again.
Instead, he issued a razor-edged ultimatum. Deliver the product within 1 hour, or don't bother showing your face again. On the surface, the demand looks unnecessarily theatrical, a tired television trope where impossible timeframes stand in for genuine tension. Yet the move was in fact classic Gus, precise, strategic, and merciless.
I'm coming by. I need the product. I need the product now.
At its core, the ultimatum was a test. Fring was not merely buying meth, he was buying reliability. Anyone can promise ready on a moment's notice, but Gus required proof. He wanted to know if Walter was a man of his word, or just another desperate liar inflating his capabilities. Meeting that deadline established that Walt wasn't bluffing, and more importantly, that he could obey orders without hesitation. Fring was setting expectations from the very first handshake. This is not a partnership of equals, it's a hierarchy, and Walter's role is at the bottom. The time constraint also served a more sinister function: insulation.
Exit 13 off the 25 south to a truck stop.
By forcing Walt to act immediately, Gus denied him the luxury of phoning the DEA or rigging a sting. Every minute Walt was scrambling to prepare was a minute Gus remained untouchable, far away, maintaining plausible deniability. This was not simply a business deal, it was an audition, staged with maximum suspicion and minimum risk. Of course, one could argue the demand bordered on absurd. Would Gus truly have discarded the best meth cook in the world over a 5-minute delay? Unlikely. But the ultimatum was never about punctuality. It was about obedience. Professionalism in Gus's empire meant more than producing a perfect product. It meant surrendering one's life, schedule, and even family to the business, without question. Walt proved it when he missed the birth of his daughter just to keep Gus's clock. That, chillingly enough, was exactly the point. The irony is that Gus, the great judge of character, miscalculated.
Without us, without Jesse and myself, you have no one.
He believed he was training a subordinate, someone who would fall in line under pressure. What he failed to see was that Walter's defiance was inevitable. The 1-hour test proved Walt's competence, but it also sowed the seeds of rebellion. After all, you can only bend someone like Walter White so far before he decides to break everyone else instead. In the end, the rush deadline was less about logistics than about philosophy. Gus demanded absolute submission disguised as efficiency, and Walt, blinded by pride, delivered. The deal worked. The empire expanded.
Gus Fring is dead.
And yet the very test designed to keep Gus safe was the one that invited his eventual downfall. Walter White didn't care about his family the way you think, and it's time to stop pretending he did. The question of whom Walter White truly cared for is a trap. At first glance, the answer seems simple. His family, of course. Yet a closer look at his actions exposes a far more twisted truth.
This family is everything to me.
Yes, he loved them. Yes, he fought for them. And yes, he destroyed them in the process. Skylar is the most obvious example.
You don't live here anymore.
If his empire were really about protecting her, he would have stopped when she begged him to. He didn't. But his refusal does not erase the fact that he did, in his own fractured way, care for her. His infamous phone call in Ozymandias, painting her as an innocent victim, wasn't a moment of cruelty, but one of protection. Walt cared, but only within the parameters of his own ego. Jesse, meanwhile, was both protege and surrogate son. Their relationship was toxic, abusive, manipulative, yet undeniably laced with genuine care.
Paid for your rehab?
Walt saved his life multiple times, from running down drug dealers to sparing him when others demanded Jesse's death. He visited him in rehab, encouraged him toward education, even gave him millions with no strings attached. And yet every moment of kindness was tangled with self-interest. Walt cared, but only when caring didn't cost him control. The irony of Hank cannot be overstated. Walt spent years undermining his brother-in-law, only to collapse in genuine grief when he died. He offered up his fortune in a desperate, futile attempt to save him, proof that, against all odds, Hank mattered. The tragedy was that Walt's pride put Hank in that situation in the first place. And then there's the children. Walt Jr. and Holly are perhaps the purest evidence of his humanity.
That is 9,720,000.
He arranged for his money to reach them through Gretchen and Elliot, swallowing his pride only after months of exile. His final acts ensured they would not be left destitute. They were always the starting point of his empire, and in the end, the last flicker of sincerity he had left. The truth is that Walt did care. Deeply. Even painfully. But never more than he cared about himself.
Jesse, you asked.
His pride was his religion. His empire, his altar. He began as a man desperate to provide for his family. But once the cancer was tamed, that mission was no longer about them. It was about feeling alive, powerful, respected. In that sense, his family and Jesse were less people and more extensions of his fractured self. Calling him a heartless monster is as lazy as calling him a selfless martyr. He was neither. He was a man who loved, but badly. Who cared, but conditionally, who could sacrifice everything for those close to him one moment and use them as pawns the next. Walter White's tragedy isn't that he didn't care, it's that he cared, but always on his own terms. Think Walter White prevented more harm than he caused? That's the biggest lie Breaking Bad ever sold you. The idea that Walter White somehow prevented more harm than he caused is the kind of moral gymnastics only a desperate apologist could attempt. Yes, meth is destructive, and yes, Walt was a monster. But let's entertain the argument.
We will produce a chemically pure and stable product that performs as advertised.
Supposedly, he cleaned up the meth industry by eliminating shady cooks who cut their product with household poisons, dismantled multiple drug syndicates, and left behind a fortune for his family. Noble on paper. In reality, his crusade left behind nothing but blood, chaos, and a vacuum for worse predators to fill. Take his supposed war on cartels and crime syndicates. Walt may have toppled the Salamancas, Gus Fring, and the Aryan Brotherhood, but no criminal empire dies with its leader. Remove one capo, and another steps in, often with less restraint. Gus, for all his ruthlessness, at least ran his empire with clinical precision, producing a consistent, safe product and minimizing collateral damage. When Walt toppled him, the replacement was not a moral improvement, but a collection of trigger-happy thugs like Todd and Uncle Jack.
And there is this kid on a dirt bike.
Their reign introduced public executions, child murder, and the daylight assassination of a DEA agent. Walt didn't eradicate evil. He promoted chaos. The argument that his meth was better and therefore less harmful is equally hollow. High-quality meth isn't a community service. It's just a more efficient poison. Walt didn't reduce demand or addiction. He only ensured addicts would eventually transition from his pristine formula to Bubba's toilet meth once he was gone. The demand was always going to exist, and his product merely sustained it until he inevitably self-destructed. And then there's the matter of the bodies. Walt's kill count isn't limited to gangsters who deserved it.
I watched Jane die.
He allowed Jane to die in front of him, which directly led to a plane crash killing 150 innocents. He poisoned a child to manipulate Jesse. He ensured the deaths of Gail, Hank, and countless nameless bystanders caught in the crossfire.
Why are you still alive? Why don't you just die already?
His family was left traumatized, destitute, and in Flynn's case, permanently disgusted by his very existence. This is not the resume of a man who made the world safer. It's the calling card of someone who burned everything around him just to prove he could. Even the supposed financial silver lining collapses under scrutiny. His money, once soaked in blood, became untouchable. His family refused it. Flynn would have rather seen it burned than accepted as an excuse for his father's crimes. Walt's final ploy to funnel millions to them through the Schwartzes was clever, but no one doubts his family would suspect the truth. It wasn't a gift. It was a taunt from beyond the grave, a reminder that his pride was the only legacy they truly inherited. Defenders sometimes argue that law enforcement removing criminals creates the same kind of vacuum, but that logic ignores a crucial difference. The DEA doesn't murder children or poison kids with ricin to win territory.
There's not much new you can tell me about Walter White.
Walt wasn't the law in another form. He was an outlaw whose ego demanded he be the kingpin, no matter the human cost. At bottom, Walter White was not a dark savior or an accidental reformer. He was a cautionary tale about pride masquerading as purpose. The Schwartzes offered to pay for his treatment. He could have lived comfortably as a researcher. Instead, he chose meth and mayhem, cloaking ambition as necessity. The result was not a world spared from crime, but one drowning in more blood than before, with a trail of shattered lives and corpses as his monument. Walter White did not prevent harm. He was the harm. Walt didn't save the world, but you can save this channel. Subscribe.